Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and we are going to be talking about the car market. Now, this is normally a video that I would reserve for the second channel, but I am posting this on the main channel because I know it'll reach a broader audience, and that is important because what is happening right now is absolute insanity, and I think as many people need to hear about it as possible. Before we get into this video though, as always, link to my car buying guide in the description down below, and then some of the data that I will provide in today's video comes from Cox Automotive. Let's get into it. We are going to start off by talking about the new car market, and then we are going to dive into the used car market, and then we'll pull it together to talk about the calamity that is currently happening within the car market in general. So the new car market, I think the best way to describe it is to call it depressed or stagnated. And here's what I mean. Prior to the pandemic, it was pretty normal to see the new car market see about 17 to 18 million new vehicles sold per year. That was pretty consistent for about a decade after the recession. Now, post-pandemic, the new car market got crunched when it comes to volume. In 2022, I think there's about 14.5 million new cars sold. And then 2023, last year was a better year. We were over 15 million units. And this year we're pacing for about the same amount. And that's why I see that the car market is depressed / stagnated with new car sales, because things were growing post-pandemic and now they're not. They're just staying the same. The volume is not increasing and it is not at a normal level, and this is a huge problem. Well, actually, I shouldn't say it's a huge problem. If new cars were selling for massive amounts, it would be a huge problem, but they aren't anymore. Yes, automakers did increase their prices by a very large margin over the course of the pandemic, but incentive spend on new cars is pretty much as high as it's been for the last, it depends on the automaker, but the last 7 to 10 years with a lot of automakers. And so automakers currently have higher production costs with these vehicles at the same time that they're having to spend more money on a per vehicle case to sell those cars, to convince people to buy their product. And so we have a market where automakers are making less and less money and more cars aren't being sold, right? It would be fine if automakers were making less money on a per car basis if the market was continuing to grow, but it's not continuing to grow. So I think it's pretty obvious to see the problem here. And, I think the poster child for this is probably Stellantis. If you look at their sales, they're seeing a year-over-year decline of about 20% at the same time that they're seeing their net income decline by about 50%. It's a little bit less than that, but that is absolutely massive. So they're selling fewer cars and they're making a lot less money. If you look at a lot of the other automakers, they're actually going to be selling more cars this year, but a lot of them are still making significantly less money because of that increased incentive spend. And so even if they are, up in volume, they aren't up in money. And so that creates a problem. Now, that's pretty much a basic overview of what's happening in the new car market. All you really need to know is that new cars are not selling at the rate they were selling at prior to the pandemic. The growth has pretty much stopped in terms of volume, and manufacturers are continuing to have to pump more and more money into the system to convince people to buy cars. And it seems like it's, a little bit of a positive feedback loop at this point. Now, if we dive over into the used car market, things aren't doing so hot, just like the new car market. So over the course of the pandemic, used car prices just kept climbing and climbing. There was a point where most used cars, if they were 1 to 3 years old, were selling for original MSRP, and in some cases, more than original MSRP. Think about this for a second. People were paying more money than what a manufacturer wanted for a car brand new, but for something that was secondhand. It was crazy, but it happened. Now, used car values have declined quite substantially since that peak. Most used cars at this point are no longer selling for original MSRP. A lot of them are substantially below. So depreciation is actually a thing. And if you guys watch some of the reviews on this main channel, You've probably seen that series that I've been doing where I've reviewed some cars that, finally have depreciated, and there's some pretty good values. I mean, look at those Land Rovers that I reviewed that were 50% of original MSRP. I mean, literally just 2 years ago, like the full size that I reviewed, that's a good example. A V8 full-size Range Rover, old body style, was selling for pretty much original MSRP just 2 years ago, and now it's selling for half of that. And it wasn't, that's the normal depreciation of a Range Rover. It experienced normal depreciation plus a little bit extra because the car market has corrected. And I mean, you look at the average price of a used car and it really shows. $25,000 roughly is the average price of a used car in today's market. And so that's still not as affordable as what we saw prior to the pandemic with used cars, but it's more affordable than the peak. And so what we're seeing continually with used cars is that as time goes on, they're experiencing above average depreciation. We have some months where things might go up a little bit or things might be level, but the overall trend is that the value of used cars basically, again, you had that big peak and then things have dropped. And again, there's been some, it's like the stock market, right? There's been some ups and downs, but overall the trend is downward, and it doesn't seem like these values are going to be stopping anytime soon. And now this leads us into the credit side of things. Credit card debt is massive in the US right now. And part of it is, frivolous spending, right? That's what people always associate with credit cards, is frivolous spending. But a lot of it is people are being forced to put items on their credit cards that are bare necessities, groceries and gas, for example. And just to give you an idea of how bad credit card debt is right now and how much interest is just ravaging people. A lot of people right now have interest rates on these credit cards of over 20%, and every single month the estimate is that credit card interest is costing Americans about $20 billion. Every single month, $20 billion just gets erased from people's pockets and goes towards the credit card companies in the form of interest. Now, this is happening at the same time that car repossessions are at an all-time high. We're seeing more repos than what we saw definitely prior to the pandemic, more than what we saw in 2020, and more than what we saw in 2008. And so we have a major problem in the US with credit. People can't make their car payments, and they can't even pay for basic necessities like food and gas. With all of this information, this now gives us the ability to predict the future. No, I'm just kidding. But we can at least, make a prediction that could have some level of accuracy. We'll just have to see, right? We won't know until we know, and then we'll know. But let's just put it all together regardless. So within the new car market, things have stagnated. We're not seeing more new cars being sold, right? It's pretty much just flatlined, and it's flatlined at a place where dealers and manufacturers are having to discount more and more. And so selling new cars is becoming less and less profitable, right? Just look at the profit statements of big manufacturers, and you can kind of extrapolate that down to the dealership level, because the dealerships are also having to discount these new cars. And you can see how things are pretty rough in the car industry if you are currently selling new cars. Now, this is happening at the same time that used car values continue to decline. Used cars are getting cheaper and cheaper as time goes on, at the same time that people are basically drowning in credit card debt, and they're drowning in debt so much that they can't even keep something that's a necessity for most people, a car, right? Getting your car repossessed, that's a big deal. Here in the US, if you don't have a car in a lot of places, then you can't work, right? It's like where I live, for example, if I didn't have a car, I wouldn't be able to get a job. This is a really bad problem, that people are not even able to pay for things that, again, are considered basic necessities. And so my prediction moving forward is that we're going to continue to see bigger discounts on these new cars. Now, how big are the discounts going to get? I don't know, right? It depends on what, it comes down to the automakers, really. It depends on what they want the car industry to look like. If they want to start selling more cars like what was seen prior to the pandemic, then yeah, they're probably going to have to cut prices more, and they're probably going to have to release more affordable cars. That's actually one of the things that I think is holding back the new car market more so than anything else, is that most of the new cars coming out are all the big, fancy, expensive models. Manufacturers don't want to build affordable cars anymore, and so they're just not going to sell as many cars. And so I think, yeah, there's probably going to be a need for bigger discounts, but also a need for manufacturers to reconsider building affordable cars. They might not have the biggest profit margins, but they're important for sales. And, ultimately, I think they are profitable in the long term because these people will buy more cars as time goes on and probably more expensive cars, and they also service those cars. So there's money to be made elsewhere. But that's the trend that I see happening, is that we're just going to see bigger discounts with new cars. I just don't know how big they're going to get. With used cars, I think that because we're going to see bigger discounts with these new cars, that's actually going to put even more fire on what is currently happening in the used car market, where these values are continuing to decline. People are realizing that, no, they don't want to spend original MSRP on this used car, and they don't even want to spend, significantly less than original MSRP. They're realizing that these used cars, they're used cars, they're only worth so much money, the utility that they can provide, and then also how much it costs to keep them going. And that's something that's been really big, right? Is you have these cars that have a lot of miles on them and they're still really expensive, and it's not even worth buying it because you have to spend this big amount of money just to purchase it, and then you have to spend even more money just to keep it on the road. And so I think we're going to continue to see these values drop more and more. And are they going to be as inexpensive as they were prior to the pandemic? I don't know at this point. Again, your guess is as good as mine, but I think that trend is going to continue. And I think that it could increase in pace if things in the broader economy continue to be as bad as they are. If we continue to see an increase in credit card debt and an increase in car repossessions, then that's just going to weaken the market overall. That's fewer people that can buy a car, supply and demand, so prices are going to have to go down more. Let me know what you guys think about this whole situation, and hopefully this was enlightening for some of you. And I think the biggest takeaway from this video is it's a buyer's market now, is what I would call it. You can get deals on new cars, right? There's big dealer discounts, there's a lot of manufacturer rebates, and then, consider looking at used cars. If you were kind of out of the used car market for the last few years because prices were crazy, go and look at those cars again. And some of them, you'll see that, I'm not saying that's the best time to buy, but you'll see that some of them have pricing that is a lot more reasonable than you'd expect considering what we've seen the last few years. I'll see you.